How did one man try to unite all of Europe under a single empire? Napoleon Bonaparte wasn't just a military genius. He was also the architect of modern Europe. He made his brothers kings, wrote his own laws, created his own monetary system. He dreamed of an empire stretching from Lisbon to Moscow. And he came so close to this dream that Europe was never the same again. So how did this Corsican officer dare to change the continent's destiny? How did he try to tear down traditional monarchies and replace them with his own system? Today I'm going to tell you not just how Napoleon fought, but how he built an empire. Because real revolution happens not on the battlefield, but at the governing table. And Napoleon's legacy lies not in the battles he won, but in the systems he created. Our story begins in 1799 with the coup of 18 Brumaire. But this wasn't just a military coup. This was the first step of a political revolution that would change Europe. When Napoleon became first consul, he faced a France torn apart. The revolution had lasted 10 years. The economy had collapsed. Society was polarized. But Napoleon saw opportunity in this chaos. Because chaos is the best time to build new systems. His first move was to reorganize the consulate system in his favor. There were 3 consuls, but the real power was held by Napoleon as first consul. This wasn't just a political maneuver. This was laying the groundwork for future empire. Napoleon's genius showed most clearly in how he could win over different social groups. He promised equality and freedom to the revolutionary Jacobin. He guaranteed order and stability to the old aristocrats. He gave the property security pledged to the bourgeoisie. This wasn't just populism. This was a strategy for building a broad-based coalition. Making peace with the Catholic Church through the Concordat was the perfect example of this strategy. Reconciling with the Church, which had been damaged during the Revolution, both secured conservative support and improved relations with Catholic kingdoms across Europe. When he declared himself emperor in 1804, it wasn't just personal ambition. This was an attempt to create a new type of legitimacy. The old monarchy was based on God's grace. Napoleon claimed he would be based on the people's will. This was a revolutionary concept, taking the crown from the Pope's hands and crowning himself at the coronation ceremony was symbolically very powerful. This gesture sent the message, I take my power not from the Pope, but from myself. This was an open challenge to traditional European monarchies. Napoleon's success in domestic politics formed the foundation for his plans in foreign policy. A strong and stable France was the necessary tool for European hegemony. And Napoleon had masterfully built this tool. Napoleon's European vision wasn't just conquest, but an integration plan. He was trying to do what no one had accomplished since the Roman Empire, unite the continent under a single political structure. This vision was much more radical and comprehensive than the modern European Union. Napoleon aimed not just for economic integration, but complete political unity. One currency, one legal system, one administrative style. This was truly a superstate project. The establishment of the Confederation of the Rhine was the first concrete step of this plan. Created in 1806, this structure was an attempt to create a new Germany on the ruins of the Holy Roman Empire. 16 German states united under Napoleon's protection. This meant not just military alliance, but administrative and legal unity. The model he applied in Italy was even more interesting. The Cisalpine Republic, Ligurian Republic, Roman Republic. These weren't just puppet states. Napoleon was pursuing a project to make the Italian peninsula into a single political entity. This was an attempt at Italian unity half a century before. The Risorgimento, his most ambitious project, was the intervention in Spain. Removing the Spanish Bourbons from the throne and making his brother Joseph king wasn't just family nepotism. This was a plan to integrate the territories south of the Pyrenees into the empire. In Napoleon's vision, the center of this new Europe would naturally be Paris. But this center wouldn't be a Roman-style colonial structure, but more like a federal system. Each region would preserve its own culture, but would be subject to common laws. Behind this plan was also ideological motivation. Napoleon aimed to spread Enlightenment values throughout Europe, destroying feudalism, establishing the principle of equality, creating a merit system. This wasn't just French hegemony, but a modernization project. Of course, this project was completely contrary to the interests of existing powers. Britain, Russia, Austria, ... They all knew they would lose power in this new order. That's why alliances against Napoleon were constantly renewed, but Napoleon's plan wasn't based solely on military force. He was trying to create lasting unity through economic integration, cultural assimilation, and administrative cooperation. Chapter 3. Family Diplomacy. The Bonaparte dynasty's European thrones. One of Napoleon's most skillful strategies was placing family members on various thrones across Europe. This wasn't just nepotism, but a systematic part of empire building. The Habsburgs had gained power for centuries through marriage diplomacy. Napoleon applied the same strategy, but much faster and more radically. Joseph Bonaparte becoming King of Naples 1806, then Spain 1808, was the first major step of this strategy. Joseph wasn't just a puppet. He tried to make real reforms in the territories given to him. In Naples, he abolished the feudal system, established a modern bureaucracy, and implemented the Napoleonic Code. Louis Bonaparte, becoming King of Holland 1806, was a strategic move that increased Bonaparte influence in Northern Europe while being crucial for maritime and commercial purposes. Control of Holland was critical in the economic war against Britain. Jerome Bonaparte, becoming King of Westphalia 1807, increased Bonaparte influence in Germany. The Kingdom of Westphalia was very different from traditional German mini-states. Modern constitution, secular government, principle of equality. This was a pioneer of modernization in Germany. Caroline Bonaparte, becoming Queen of Naples, was an effort to expand the sphere of influence even through a sister. Her marriage to Joachim Murat was a strategic marriage that combined military talents with dynastic interests. The most important marriage diplomacy move was Napoleon's own marriage to Marie-Louise, 1810. Marrying the daughter of the Austrian emperor was not only making peace with the Habsburgs, but also an attempt to gain legitimacy. This marriage was trying to make Napoleon part of traditional European aristocracy. The greatest advantage of this family network was coordination. Bonaparte kings followed common policies and supported each other. The Continental System became much more effective with this coordination, but at the same time, the weakness of this system was also in family ties. Over time, the brothers began to prioritize the interests of their own kingdoms over Bonaparte family interests. Louis in Holland and Joseph in Spain began to look after local interests. This contributed to the system's dissolution. Nevertheless, the family diplomacy strategy showed how comprehensive Napoleon's vision was. He wasn't content with just military conquest. He aimed for long-term political control. The Continental System, which began with the Berlin Decrees in 1806, was one of Napoleon's most ambitious projects. This was an attempt to defeat Britain without using military force. The idea was simple. By closing all of Europe to British goods, force Britain into economic collapse. This strategy was a revolutionary approach for its time. Napoleon understood that the real power of the 19th century was trade and industry. Britain's military power was limited, but its economic power was enormous. To break this power, it was necessary to take away its markets. The system was perfect in theory. All European ports closed to British ships, British goods confiscated, intermediary countries punished. European countries that were Britain's biggest Customers now turned their backs on it. In practice, however, problems began to emerge. The first problem was that demand for British goods was really high. European consumers wanted quality and cheap British products. French industry wasn't yet at a level to fill this gap. The second problem was smuggling. British goods continued to enter Europe illegally despite being banned. Control was impossible, especially in border regions. The third problem was the reluctance of Allied countries, Russia, Prussia, Austria. They all saw that the system was harming their own economies. Russia's withdrawal from the system in 1810 was particularly damaging. The biggest problem was Napoleon's own family. His brother Louis, as King of Holland, turned a blind eye to British goods. Jerome didn't fully implement the system in Westphalia. Family interests began to conflict with imperial policy. Still, the system was partially successful. Britain really did experience economic difficulties. Exports fell, unemployment rose, political crises emerged. In 1811, Britain was almost on the brink of economic collapse, but the system ultimately failed. Because Napoleon underestimated Britain's ability to find alternative markets. Latin America, Asia, the Middle East. Britain compensated for its losses. From other regions. The failure of the Continental System was one of the main reasons for Napoleon's Russian campaign. He was forced to use military force to bring Russia back into the system. This became the beginning of the end for the empire. Napoleon's most lasting legacy may not be his military victories, but his legal revolution. The Code Civil Napoleonic Code that came into effect in 1804 was a legal document that affected not just France, but the entire world. This code transformed the French Revolution's principles of liberty, equality, fraternity into concrete legal regulations. The feudal legal system was completely abolished and replaced with a modern, secular, egalitarian system. The sanctity of property rights was one of the cornerstones of the code. This protected bourgeois interests while also encouraging social mobility. The class you were born into no longer determined the property you could own. The principle of equality was its most revolutionary aspect. Everyone was equal before the law. Aristocratic privilege, religious discrimination, regional differences, all were abolished. This was an incredibly radical approach for its time. Secularism represented the biggest break from the old regime. Law was now based on state authority, not religious authority. Marriage was a civil contract. Divorce was a legal right. Inheritance was arranged without regard to religion, but the code wasn't egalitarian in all areas. It was quite traditional regarding women's rights. Women couldn't obtain political rights and were economically under male guardianship. This showed that Enlightenment principles weren't fully applied. The most important feature of the code was its universality. It was valid not just for the French, but for the entire empire. The same legal system was applied everywhere, in Italy, Germany, Holland. This universality was a critical part of the imperial plan. Common law created common identity, uniting different peoples. Napoleon was trying to create political unity. Through legal unity. The impact of the code far exceeded the Napoleonic period. Even today, many countries' legal systems are based on the Napoleonic Code. Latin America, Africa, Asia. Many countries established legal systems influenced by this code. Napoleon's other reforms had similar permanence. The lycée system is still valid in France today. The bureaucratic structure formed the foundation of modern state administration. The Legion of Honor became the precursor to merit-based award systems. All these reforms were part of the imperial vision. Napoleon wasn't just conquering territory. He was also doing social engineering. He was building a modern state system and spreading it throughout Europe. Napoleon's imperial project was not only political and legal, but also cultural. He was trying to make French culture the dominant culture of Europe. This was the first systematic application of soft power. French became the official language throughout the empire. Not just the administrative language, but also the language of culture and science. European aristocracy already spoke French, but Napoleon tried to spread this to all levels. The French education system was established in conquered regions. The lycée system was implemented not just in France, but throughout the empire. This wasn't just providing education. It was spreading French values. Young people learned French history, French literature, French philosophy, art and architecture. Also became tools of hegemony. The empire style was spread throughout the empire, from Paris to Berlin, from Rome to Amsterdam. Similar architectural styles began to appear everywhere. This created visual unity and normalized French aesthetics. Museums and libraries became centers of cultural dissemination. The artworks collected in the Louvre weren't just theft. This was an attempt to make Paris the cultural center of Europe. If the world's most beautiful works were in Paris, Paris would naturally become the most important city. Science and technology were also part of this strategy. Institutions like École Polytechnique were opened throughout the empire. The metric system became mandatory. French scientific terminology became standard. This was not just practical, but also a matter of prestige. Fashion and social life were perhaps the most effective tools of dissemination. French fashion became the standard for European aristocracy. Social protocols, theater and opera preferences, even food culture, all spread from Paris. This cultural hegemony supported political hegemony. If people saw French culture as superior, they would also accept French rule. This was the modern version of what Rome had done. But this project wasn't completely successful either. Local cultures proved resistant. The Romanticism movement in Germany opposed French classicism. Popular culture in Spain rejected French influence. Local identity in Italy continued to strengthen. Still, the impact was lasting. Even today, French is the language of diplomacy. French culture is considered prestigious. Paris continues to be a world cultural center. Napoleon's cultural project partially reached its goal despite political failure. Napoleon's least known but most effective achievement was creating the modern bureaucracy system. He completely destroyed the feudal administrative system and created a centralized, professional, merit-based administration in its place. The prefect system became the heart of this revolution. He divided France into departments and placed a prefect appointed by the central government at the head of each department. These prefects weren't local nobles or clergy, but professional administrators. This system didn't stay just in France. It was implemented throughout the empire. In Italy, Germany, Holland, the same administrative model was established everywhere. This created administrative unity and supported imperial integration. The merit system was its most revolutionary aspect. The class you were born into no longer determined the position you could reach in the state. Talent, education, performance. These were the promotion criteria. This increased social mobility and strengthened support for the regime. Institutions like École Nationale d'Administration fed this new bureaucracy. Professionally trained, qualified civil servants were raised and assigned throughout the empire. Tax system was also completely renewed. The old system based on privilege was abolished, and everyone began paying taxes according to their income and property. This both provided justice and increased state revenues. The registration system was revolutionized. Birth, death, marriage. Everything was transferred to civil records. This incredibly increased the state's capacity to control citizens. It also provided statistical and planning opportunities. The communication network was systematized. The optical telegraph system provided rapid communication from Paris to every corner of the empire. This strengthened central control and reduced local autonomy. The gendarmerie organization was established. This wasn't just police, but also the executive power of bureaucracy. State decisions were implemented through the power of the gendarmerie. This system was so effective that it was preserved even after Napoleon fell. When the Bourbons returned, they didn't change the administrative system because it worked much more effectively. The impact throughout the empire was also lasting. Germany, Italy, Spain all established similar administrative systems. The foundations of the modern European state were laid during the Napoleonic period. This administrative revolution was the backbone of the imperial project. Because effective, bureaucracy is essential for governing large territories. This was also the reason for Rome's longevity. Napoleon was trying to apply the same strategy. Napoleon understood that the future of the empire lay in educated human resources. That's why education system reform was one of his highest priority projects. The lycée system was completely restructured. A system was established that would provide quality education, not just for the elite, but for all talented young people. This increased social mobility and strengthened support for the regime. The curriculum was shaped according to imperial needs. Mathematics, sciences, technical subjects gained weight. Because modern state administration required civil servants with technical knowledge. Technical schools, like École Polytechnique, trained engineers and technicians. These graduates served not only in military, but also civilian projects. Road, bridge, canal construction. All were carried out by graduates of these schools. The university system was also centralized. The Universität Imperiale brought all higher education under one roof. This ensured quality control while creating ideological unity. The scholarship system supported social justice. Poor but talented students could receive education with state scholarships. This strengthened the democratic aspect of the regime. Scientific research became state policy. The Institut de France coordinated scientific studies. Research was supported in every field: astronomy, mathematics, physics, chemistry. Technological development was coordinated with military needs. Gunpowder technology, metallurgy, communication systems. Scientific discoveries were immediately put into military application. The metric system was an example of scientific standardization. Using the same units of measurement throughout the empire both facilitated trade and strengthened administrative unity. The scientists brought during the Egyptian expedition pioneered scientific diplomacy. This was not just gathering information, but also an opportunity to showcase French scientific superiority. This educational revolution was implemented throughout the empire. Similar schools were opened in Italy, Germany, Holland. The aim was not just to spread French culture, but also to disseminate modern, secular, scientific thinking. However, Napoleon remained traditional regarding women's education. Technical education wasn't recommended for women. This reflected the era's perception of women, but also showed the limits of Napoleon's vision. Still, the general impact was revolutionary. The foundation of modern education systems in Europe was laid during the Napoleonic period. Merit-based education, secular curriculum, technically focused teaching. All of these were Napoleon's legacy. Why did Napoleon's imperial project fail? The answer lay in overextension and increasing resistance. The first problem was geographical difficulties. Controlling an empire stretching from Lisbon to Moscow was almost impossible with the technology of that time. Communication was slow, transportation difficult, local control weak. The second problem was cultural resistance. European peoples had initially welcomed the modernization Napoleon brought, but over time, they began to see French hegemony as foreign occupation. The third problem was being constantly at war. Protecting the empire required continuous military campaigns. This increased both human losses and economic burden. French society began experiencing war fatigue. The Spanish Uprising 1808 was one of the biggest turning points. The Spanish people didn't accept Joseph Bonaparte. They started guerrilla warfare. This was the first time a people had risen up against Napoleon. The conflict in Spain was draining Napoleon's resources. 300,000 French soldiers got stuck in Spain. This force couldn't be used on other fronts. Austria's re-entry into war in 1809 showed the coalition was strengthening. The victory at Wagram provided temporary relief but didn't solve the problems. The biggest mistake was the Russian campaign, 1812. Tsar Alexander's withdrawal from the Continental System forced Napoleon to seek a military solution. But this expedition ended in disaster. An army of 600,000 was almost completely destroyed. The Russian disaster broke the myth that Napoleon was invincible. New alliances began to form in Europe. Prussia, Austria, Sweden, all united against Napoleon. The Battle of Leipzig, 1813, was Europe's general assault against Napoleon. Losing this battle brought the end of the empire. Napoleon's biggest mistake was not stopping in time. After Tilsit in 1807, he could have accepted establishing an empire within reasonable boundaries. But his constant desire for expansion eventually caused his downfall. Although Napoleon failed politically, the legacy he left was permanent. The foundations of modern Europe were laid during his time. The legal system was the most lasting legacy. The Napoleonic Code is still valid in many countries today. The principles of the modern rule of law, equality, secularism, property security, are his work. The administrative system was the second great legacy. Modern bureaucracy, merit system, central administration, all of these were Napoleon's inventions. European states continued to adopt this model. The education system was the third lasting impact. The lycée system, technical education, secular curriculum. The foundations of modern education were laid during the Napoleonic period. The spread of nationalism was an unexpected result. Napoleon spread French nationalism, but also triggered other nationalisms. German, Italian, Spanish nationalism strengthened in reaction to Napoleon. The Industrial Revolution accelerated. The Continental System forced European countries to develop their own industries. Investments increased to produce alternatives to British goods. Liberalism strengthened. The freedoms Napoleon brought couldn't be taken back. Press freedom, freedom of thought, freedom of trade. These became permanent gains. Secularization continued. Napoleon's separation of church and state had started an irreversible process. Europe gradually became a secular continent. However, there was regression in women's rights. The anti-women provisions of the Napoleonic Code remained effective for a long time. Progress in this area was delayed until the 20th century. Cultural impact was also lasting. French continued to be an international language. Paris remained cultural center. French culture maintained its prestige. Perhaps the most important legacy was ideas: equality, freedom, national sovereignty. These concepts spread throughout Europe thanks to Napoleon. There was no going back now. Napoleon's leadership style continues to be a subject of study in modern political science. His strategies are still studied by today's leaders. Charismatic leadership was Napoleon's most distinctive feature. He could influence people with his vision. This ability is a quality sought by modern leaders too. Rapid decision-making was the key to his military successes. This is also a talent sought in modern business. Being able to make quick and correct decisions under uncertainty. System-building ability was his most valuable legacy. Napoleon didn't just destroy, he also built. Modern leaders also need this. Vision. Multitask management was another feature of his. He could simultaneously run military, political, administrative, and cultural projects. This is a necessary skill in today's complex world. Communication mastery is even more important in the modern media age. Napoleon could speak effectively to both his army and the people. This ability is critical today too, but Napoleon's mistakes are also instructive. Overconfidence, lack of advisors, being closed to criticism. These are characteristics modern leaders should avoid. Lack of sustainability is the biggest problem. Napoleon achieved short-term successes, but couldn't ensure long-term stability. Modern leaders shouldn't repeat this mistake. Napoleon Bonaparte's story is both a story of great success and tragic failure. He almost achieved the impossible, governing Europe single-handedly. But he couldn't sustain this success. The reason the imperial dream didn't come true lay in the limitations of the period. Early 19th century technology didn't allow effective control of such a large geography. Moreover, national identities were beginning to strengthen, but Napoleon's vision was far ahead of its time. European unity, common law, common currency, free movement. He had dreamed of these 200 years ago. Today, the European Union is realizing his dreams. His greatest success was spreading ideas. Freedom, equality, modernization. These values spread throughout Europe thanks to Napoleon. This was a more lasting impact than military victories. Napoleon was a leader of the transition period. He built a bridge between the old world and the new world. He destroyed feudalism and brought modernity. This transformation was inevitable, but Napoleon accelerated it. Napoleon's story ends here, but his legacy continues, because he showed that visionary leadership can change the course of history. It's possible to emerge from a small island and change the world. Of course, Napoleon made mistakes too. Excessive ambition, constant war, dictatorial tendencies. These are characteristics modern leaders should avoid, but his positive legacy is much greater. Modern law, education, bureaucracy, secularism, all are his work. Modern civilization became possible thanks to these systems. So what do you think was Napoleon's greatest achievement? His military victories, or the systems he built? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you love these kinds of history stories, don't forget to subscribe, because next week I'm going to tell you about another revolutionary leader's story. Shook Europe, but also transformed it. He couldn't build an empire, but he spread modernity.